Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The wind howled across the barren landscape of the abandoned planet, whipping up clouds of dust that obscured the crumbling ruins of a once great Cybertronian outpost. Jagged metallic spires half buried in the sand jutted out like the bones of a long dead beast. Somewhere deep within this forgotten wasteland, Megatron stood over a glowing chamber, his red optics gleaming with a hunger that had not been seen in millennia. Finally, Megatron growled, his deep voice reverberating through the desolate corridor. He reached out, his massive hand hovering over the pulsating core of Energon Omega, a power long lost to time, and now rediscovered. With this, I will bring the Autobots to their knees. Nothing will stop me. He hesitated for only a moment, a rare glimmer of caution flashing through his mind. He knew the stories this energy had driven even the mighty primes to madness. But his ambition, as always, overpowered any lingering doubt. With a roar, he plunged his arm into the core, the energy immediately surging into his circuit. Pain then power, more power than he had ever imagined. His body convulsed as the raw force of the Energon Omega ripped through him, enhancing his strength, his speed, and his senses. For a brief moment. He felt invincible. But as quickly as the euphoria came, a searing pain followed. His mind began to fracture, as if he were two beings in one, a part of him drunk on the power, the other struggling to maintain control. He clenched his fists and let out a primal scream that echoed through the ruins, shaking the very foundation beneath him. The Decepticons, standing guard outside the chamber, exchanged uneasy glances. Starscream, ever the opportunist, narrowed his optics as he watched his leader from a distance. The great Megatron, he muttered under his breath, but even he might not be able to handle this power. Perhaps it's time for new leadership. While Megatron wrestled with his newfound strength far across the galaxy, the Autobots received word of the discovery. Optimus Prime stood at the helm of the Ark, his expression grim as he listened to the report. Energon Omega, Optimus said softly, more to himself than anyone else. I'd hoped it was only a myth. Bumblebee, standing nearby, couldn't hide his concern. If Megatron has it, what do? We stop him, Optimus replied, his tone resolute. But we must be cautious. This energy is far too unstable. It nearly destroyed the primes who tried to wield it. We cannot allow Megatron to unleash its full potential. Without wasting time, Optimus dispatched a small team to investigate and neutralize the threat. Bumblebee, being one of the most resourceful and resilient among them, was tasked with leading the mission. Alongside him were Urshis and Bulkhead, two skilled Autobots who had faced more than their share of Decepticon battle. As their ship hurtled through space toward the desolate planet, Bumblebee couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. He had faced Megatron before, but this felt different. More dangerous, more final. The ship touched down near the ruins, its landing silent, save for the faint hiss of decompressing airlock. Bumblebee and his team moved swiftly using the cover of the jagged ruins to avoid detection. But it wasn't too long before they encountered resistance. A Decepticon patrol led by Starscream was waiting for them. The battle erupted in an instant, energy weapons flashing as the two sides clashed in the shadow of the ancient Cybertronian structure. Bumblebee ducked behind a twisted column, narrowly avoiding a blast from Starscream. Snanny Autobots, Starscream sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. You should have stayed on Earth. You were too late. Megatron already has the Energon Omega. Bumblebee didn't respond. Instead, he charged, transforming mid-stride into vehicle mode to gain speed and launching himself into the air. His fist connected with Starscream's jaw in a shower, sending the Decepticon reeling. But the battle wasn't over. As Bumblebee fought, he caught sight of Megatron in the distance. The Decepticon leader stood tall, crackling with energy that made the very air around him shimmer. And something was wrong. Megatron's movements were erratic, as though he were struggling to keep control of his own body. We need to stop him now, Bumblebee shouted to his team, dodging another blast from a Decepticon soldier.
You're going to tear himself apart and us with him if we don't see that stuff.
RC and Bulkhead redoubled their efforts, pushing through the Decepticon ranks with the precision of warriors who had been through countless battles together. But the closer they got to Megatron, the more they realized how dire the situation was. The Energon Omega was affecting him in ways they hadn't anticipated. Bumblebee knew there was no time to waste. He accessed the ancient Cybertronian archives stored within his memory banks. searching for any mention of how to neutralize the Energon Omega. His processors raced as he sifted through the fragmented data, piecing together a chilling story. The Primes had created the Energon Omega as a means to achieve ultimate power, but they quickly discovered that it was far too unstable. Its users would gain immense strength, but at the cost of their mind. The Primes, unable to destroy it, had sealed it away, hoping it would never be found. Now that burden fell on Bumblebee and his team. There's only one way to stop this, Bumblebee said, turning to his comrade. We need the matrix of leadership. It's the only thing that can balance the energy. We don't have time to wait for Optimus to get here, Ars protested. We don't truly have a choice, Bumblebee replied, his tone firm. We hold the line until he arrived. The next moments were a blur of chaos and destruction. Megatron, driven mad by the Energon Omega, unleashed wave after wave of energy blasts, leveling entire sections of the ruin. The Autobots barely managed to keep their distance, ducking behind cover as the ground beneath them shook with each explosion. Bumblebee's optics darted to the horizon, hoping to see Optimus Prime, said ship arriving, but there was no sign of him yet. He couldn't help but feel the crushing weight of responsibility on his shoulder. If they failed, not only would the Autobots be destroyed, but the entire Transformer race might lose their autonomy forever. As the battle raged on, Bumblebee caught glimpses of Megatron's internal struggle. There were moments when the Decepticon leader hesitated, his body twitching as if two minds were fighting for control. In those brief instants, Bumblebee saw an opening, but it was always too fleeting to exploit. Finally, just as Bumblebee was beginning to fear they wouldn't make it in time, a familiar sound reached his audio sensors, the unmistakable roar of Optimus Prime's engine. Optimus descended from the sky, landing with a thunderous crash between the Autobots and Megatron. The matrix of leadership glowed brightly in his chest, its energy a stark contrast to the wild, chaotic power of the Energon Omega. Megatron, Optimus called out, his voice calm but commanding, "This ends now." Megatron turned to face his old rival, his optics flickering wildly. You cannot stop me, Prime. I am power incarnate." Optimus took a step forward, his gaze steady. "That power will destroy you. Megatron, you cannot control it." With a deafening roar, Megatron lunged at Optimus, his fists crackling with energy. But Optimus was ready. He met Megatron's attack head-on, the two titans colliding with a force that shook the ground beneath them. As they fought, Bumblebee and the others watched in awe. The power of the Matrix seemed to counterbalance the unstable energy within Megatron, but it was clear that Optimus couldn't hold him off forever. Bumblebee knew what he had to do. He ran toward the glowing core of Energon Omega, dodging debris and energy blasts as he went. If he could disrupt the flow of energy, maybe, just maybe, they could bring Megatron down. Just as Bumblebee reached the core, a shadow loomed over him. He looked up to see Starscream, his optics gleaming with malice. "You're not going anywhere, Autobots," Starscream hissed. Bumblebee clenched his fists, ready to fight. This was it, the moment that would decide the fate of the Autobots, of Megatron, and possibly the entire universe. And he wasn't about to back down. Starscream lunged at Bumblebee with a screech, his claws extended and ready to tear the Autobot apart. Bumblebee narrowly dodged the attack, rolling to the side as Starscream's claws raked the ground where he had just stood. The energy around them crackled, feeding off the unstable Energon Omega core, causing the air to shimmer with raw power. Bumblebee knew he didn't have time for a prolonged fight. Every second that passed, Megatron grew more dangerous, and Optimus couldn't hold him off forever. Starscream circled him, a cruel grin on his face. "You think you can stop Megatron? You were a fool, Bumblebee. This is the end for the Autobots for you." Bumblebee didn't respond. His processor raced, calculating his next move. He knew he couldn't fight Starscream, not with the Decepticon's aerial advantage. But he didn't have to win this fight. He only needed to distract him long enough. Without warning, Bumblebee transformed into vehicle mode, his wheels screeching as he launched himself forward. Starscream's optics widened in surprise as Bumblebee sped straight at him. But just as Starscream prepared to strike, Bumblebee swerved hard to the left, skidding into the shadows of the crumbling ruin. Starscream snarled and transformed into his jet mode, taking off into the air with a burst of energy. Bumblebee sped through the ruins, his sensors scanning for any path that would lead him back to the Energon Omega core. He could hear Starscream above the Decepticon starsters roaring as he searched for his prey. Bumblebee had to think fast. If he didn't disable the core soon, Megatron's sesh could destroy them all. As he rounded a corner, Bumblebee spotted a narrow passageway leading deeper into the structure. It was tight too small for Starscream to follow in his jet mode. He transformed back into his robot form and darted inside, ducking under fallen beams and rubble. Behind him, he could hear Starscream's frustrated roar, the Decepticon unable to pursue him in the confined space. Bumblebee didn't slow down. He was close. He could feel the energy growing more intense with every step. The pulse of the Energon Omega reverberated through the metal wall, sending sparks dancing along the floor. Finally, he emerged into the chamber where the glowing core of energy pulsed like a heart, filling the room with an eerie, almost mesmerizing light. Optimus and Megatron were locked in a brutal struggle in the center of the chamber. Megatron's body radiated with power, his every movement sending shockwaves through the air. But Bumblebee could see the toll it was taking on him. His movements were jerky, erratic, as if he were struggling to control the power within him. Optimus fought with precision, using the matrix of leadership to counter Megatron's wild attacks, but even the great leader of the Autobots was being pushed to his limit. Bumblebee knew what he had to do. He sprinted toward the core, ignoring the searing heat and the waves of energy threatening to tear him apart. His processors buzzed with calculations. He needed to destabilize the core, disrupt the flow of energy to Megatron, but without causing it to explode and take them all with it. He was sure it was even possible, but he had to try. Just as Bumblebee reached out toward the core, a blast of energy knocked him off his feet, sending him crashing into a nearby wall. Starscream had found him. The Decepticon landed with a thud, his wings flaring out as he pointed his blaster directly at Bumblebee. "Did you really think you could escape me, Autobot?" Starscream sneered. "Megatron may be losing his mind, but I will take over where he fails, and you—" Starscream never finished his sentence. A sudden blast from behind sent him sprawling across the chamber. Bumblebee looked up to see Bulkhead and Arceus charging, in their weapons glowing as they rushed to his aid. "Go," Arceus shouted, firing another volley of shots to keep Starscream down. "We've got your back." Bumblebee didn't hesitate. He scrambled back to his feet and sprinted toward the core once again. This time, there was no stopping him. He reached out, his hand grasping the console connected to the core's power grid. His fingers moved with lightning speed, pulling up ancient Cybertronian schematics and bypassing the energy lock. The core pulsed violently, the light growing more intense as Bumblebee worked. He could feel the energy surging, threatening to overload, but he was so close if he could just. A deafening roar shook the chamber. Megatron, in a final desperate surge of power, threw Optimus across the room, sending him crashing into a pillar. The Decepticon leader turned, his optics glowing with a terrifying mixture of fury and madness. "No," Megatron bellowed, lunging toward the core. "You will not take this from me, Bumblebee." Bumblebee barely had time to react. Megatron's fist came down like a hammer, but just as it was about to strike, Optimus leapt between them, taking the full brunt of the attack. The force of the blow sent Optimus crashing into Bumblebee, both Autobots tumbling to the ground in a heap of metal and spark. For a moment, everything went still. Megatron stood over them, his body crackling with unstable energy, his optics flickering wildly. He raised his hand again, ready to deliver the final blow. But then the core exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave knocked everyone off their feet, sending debris flying in all directions. Bumblebee's vision blurred as the intense light seared his optic. He could feel the energy surging through the room, threatening to consume them all. But then something incredible happened. The matrix of leadership still glowing within Optimus' chest reacted to the explosion. Its light flared, merging with the chaotic energy of the Energon Omega, creating a harmonious balance. The wild, destructive power of the core began to stabilize its glow, softening as the matrix synergy counteracted the instability. Megatron let out a roar of frustration, his body jerking as the power within him began to fade. He staggered back, his once mighty form now weakened and vulnerable. The madness in his optics faded, replaced by a cold, hollow rage. "It's not over, Megatron," Optimus said, his voice steady despite the strain of the battle. "You cannot control this power. It will destroy you." For a moment, Megatron stood there, trembling with barely contained fury. But then with a snarl, he turned and fled, his form disappearing into the shadows of the ruin. Starscream, still recovering from the blast, scrambled after him, casting one last hateful glare at the Autobots before vanishing into the night. The chamber fell silent, save for the soft hum of the now stable Energon Omega core. Bumblebee boxed onto the ground, his system struggling to recover from the strain of the battle. He looked up at Optimus, who was standing over the core, his optics glowing with the soft light of the Matrix. "We did it," Bumblebee said, his voice weak but relieved. Optimus nodded, though. His expression remained somber. "Yes, Bumblebee. But this is only a temporary victory. The Energon Omega is still too dangerous. We must seal it away as the Primes did before us, so that it cannot be used again." Bumblebee managed a weak smile. I hope it stays lost this time." Together, the Autobots worked to secure the core, ensuring that its power would never fall into the wrong hands again. As they left the ruins behind, Bumblebee couldn't shake the feeling that their battle with Megatron was far from over. But for now, at least they had won a reprieve, a chance to rebuild, to recover, and to prepare for whatever came next. And as they soared back into the stars, Bumblebee knew that as long as they stood together, there was hope for the future of Cybertron.